For decades, Maple Grove had been the kind of town where tradition reigned supreme. Nestled between rolling hills and dense pine forests, it was the sort of place where everything had its place, and everyone knew theirs. The white picket fences gleamed under the afternoon sun. The lawns were trimmed as if they had been measured by laser, and the mailboxes looked like they'd been painted just yesterday. It was the image of order, a postcard of perfection. The people of Maple Grove prided themselves on this image. They spoke often of community standards, of neighborhood values, and of protecting what they had built. It was as if time had paused somewhere in the late 1960s, and no one inside Maple Grove saw any need for it to move forward again. And for years, that had worked just fine. But nothing unsettles a tightly wound place like change. And change, as it so often does, came quietly, rolling down the wide, tree-lined Hickory Lane in the form of a dusty, white moving truck. A new arrival. It was a crisp afternoon in mid-October. The air was cool, but the sun still held some of summer's warmth. As the truck rumbled to a stop in front of 137 Hickory Lane, curtains twitched up and down the street. Neighbors paused their raking, their gardening, their idle chats at the mailbox to watch. It had been years since anyone had moved into that house, a tidy but modest home that had stood empty since old Mr. Fisher passed away 2 winters prior. From the passenger side of the truck, the door creaked open. A woman climbed down carefully, her silver hair pulled back in a loose bun, her denim jacket hanging open over a simple, neat blouse. She moved with a kind of quiet strength, each step sure and measured, as though she had nothing to prove but everything under control. Her name was Margaret Maggie Holt, and she was 74 years old. She had lived a life, raised 3 children on her own after her husband's death, survived breast cancer in her 50s, worked as a nurse for 40 years, often on night shifts no one else wanted. She was not a woman easily rattled. Maggie stood at the bottom of her new driveway, her sharp gray eyes taking in the house that would become her next home. The siding could use a fresh coat of paint. The gutters might need clearing. But it was hers, and it was close to family, close to where she wanted to be now. She wasn't expecting a warm welcome. Maggie had moved enough times to understand how neighborhoods worked. Some neighbors would smile and say hello. Others would stare and judge. And some would test the limits. She didn't yet know that Maple Grove, for all its postcard charm, had a very particular way of welcoming newcomers. The guardians of Hickory Lane, the first to take notice of Maggie's arrival, beyond the silent observers behind their curtains, were the self-appointed keepers of Maple Grove's strict social code, Clara Whitmore and Richard Bell. Clara was 68, tall and thin with steel-gray hair always pinned back tight against her scalp. She had lived on Hickory Lane for over 40 years and fancied herself the unofficial mayor of the street. Every homeowner association rule was committed to memory. Every perceived infraction was noted in a little leather-bound notebook she kept in her purse. Clara's world was neat, predictable, controlled. Richard, on the other hand, was the kind of man who had once thrived on routine until retirement left him with too many hours to fill. A retired tax attorney, he found purpose in spreadsheets and bylaws. His alliance with Clara gave him a renewed sense of importance. By the time Maggie had carried her second box inside, Clara and Richard had already convened on Clara's porch, peering over the hedges like hawks. Moving boxes on the lawn, Clara muttered, narrowing her pale blue eyes. Off-center parking. And did you see those plastic-wrapped plants by the walkway? Richard adjusted his wire-rimmed glasses, pretending to check his phone. She just got here. It starts with a day, Clara said firmly. Then a week. And soon enough, we're the kind of street that lets the standards slip. She shook her head. No. I'll talk to her. An introduction. Maggie was arranging a rocking chair on her front porch when she heard footsteps on gravel. She straightened slowly and turned. 2 figures stood at the edge of her yard. Clara, her arms folded like a school principal's, and Richard, standing stiffly behind her like an understudy in a play he wasn't sure he wanted to be in. Good afternoon, Clara began, her voice carrying the tone of someone delivering a citation. I'm Clara Whitmore. I help maintain the integrity of Hickory Lane. Maggie raised an eyebrow. Do you now? Richard gave an awkward wave. Rich Bell. Down the street. Clara cut a sharp glance at him and pressed on. We notice you have quite a bit of clutter in your yard. Maggie wiped her hands on her jeans. I'm moving in. Yes, Clara replied, her tight-lipped smile never quite touching her eyes. But we like to maintain a certain appearance here. It would be best if you sorted things quickly. Maggie studied her for a long moment before answering. Well, Clara, I appreciate the advice. I'll get to it when I get to it. Clara's mouth thinned. We have rules. I've read them, Maggie replied smoothly. Nothing in there about moving boxes being out for a few days. It's about setting an example, Clara insisted. Maggie gave a slow, deliberate nod. I've been here half a day. How about we all take a breath? Richard shifted uncomfortably. Clara's gaze hardened. We'll bring it up with the association. You do that, Maggie said and turned back to her boxes. As Clara and Richard walked away, their heads bent close, Maggie allowed herself a quiet smile. She'd faced worse than overzealous HOA watchdogs. But she had no idea that by nightfall, all of Hickory Lane would be buzzing. The sheriff pays a visit. The next morning, Maggie was enjoying her coffee on the porch when a familiar pickup pulled up in front of her house. Out stepped her son, Sheriff Nathan Holt. Tall, broad-shouldered, with the kind of easy confidence that came from 20 years in law enforcement, he climbed the steps 2 at a time and bent to kiss her cheek. Ma, he said warmly. How's the new place? Maggie smirked. Better if I hadn't already gotten the full welcome wagon treatment. Nathan sighed. Clara, and her sidekick. He chuckled and leaned against the railing. She thinks she runs this street. She met her match, Maggie said. Nathan tilted his head. You want me to handle it? Maggie waved him off. I've dealt with worse. But if she tries anything funny, I might have to remind her whose mother I am. Nathan smiled. I'd pay to see that. Escalation. By late afternoon, Clara had struck again. An official complaint from the Homeowners Association was placed in a pristine envelope and left on Maggie's doorstep. She read it, amused, and then calmly walked down to Clara's house. When Clara opened the door, Maggie held up the letter. You went to a lot of trouble instead of waiting for me to finish unpacking. We hold everyone to the same standards, Clara said evenly. Maggie stepped closer. You don't know who I am, do you? Clara's chin lifted. You're a new resident. I'm Maggie Holt. My son, Nathan. He's the sheriff. For a split second, Clara froze. Then she recovered. That doesn't change the rules. No, Maggie said. But it means I know when rules are used for intimidation. And this. She held up the letter. This is intimidation. You can't. Let me give you some advice, Maggie interrupted. You don't run this street. And if you push me, you'll find out exactly how little power you really have. Clara's face flushed, but she said nothing as Maggie turned and walked away. A warning in the night. That evening, Maggie sent something outside. A soft shuffle, the faint scrape against her fence. She waited in the dark of her living room until the noise grew closer. Then she stepped out onto the porch without turning on a light. I wouldn't do that if I were you, she said quietly. The shadow near her fence froze. Go on, she continued. Keep pushing. See where it gets you. The figure bolted, disappearing into the night. The next morning, Nathan showed up early. Ma, there was an incident. Maggie sipped her coffee. I handled it. You sure? They'll learn. Clara's last move. But Clara wasn't done. That night, Maggie woke to the smell of smoke. Flames licked the edge of her backyard fence. She acted fast, grabbing her fire extinguisher and putting it out before it spread. Then she saw Clara at the street's edge, watching. Maggie walked toward her, slow and steady. You made a mistake. I don't know. That's your last lie. Maggie held up her phone, showing a video of Clara setting the fire. Clara paled. Arson's a crime, Maggie said. By morning, Nathan and his deputies will have this. Clara backed away, then ran. Maggie sent the video to her son and called the police. A new order. By the next day, word had spread. Clara and Richard kept to themselves. The HOA found other things to worry about. Maggie rocked slowly on her porch, watching Hickory Lane settle into a new normal. Maple Grove had met its match and lost.